Humans like to think we're the smartest species on the planet. These animals prove that intelligence isn't about having the biggest brain. It's about using what you have to outsmart overconfident humans. On, a crow in Japan learned to use a vending machine and taught other crows to do the same. The crow discovered that if it dropped coins into the vending machine slot, food would come out. It started collecting coins from parking lots, fountains, and anywhere humans dropped money. The crow would fly to the vending machine, drop in coins, and retrieve snacks. But it got better. The crow taught other crows how to do it. Soon, dozens of crows were collecting coins and using the vending machine. The vending machine company noticed their machine was being used far more than expected and installed cameras. They discovered crows were operating their machine during early morning hours before humans arrived. The crows had essentially learned to use human currency and technology to get food. Scientists who studied the behavior noted that the crows understood the relationship between coins and food, could select proper coins from other objects, and had figured out the exact slot to drop them in. When the company tried to modify the machine to prevent crow use, the crows figured out the changes within days. The company eventually gave up and accepted they were serving both human and crow customers. The stupidity was humans creating a vending machine that was so intuitive that crows could figure it out, and then failing to modify it in a way crows couldn't overcome. The crows had outsmarted engineers by learning to use human technology for their own purposes. 2. An octopus named Otto in a German aquarium learned to short-circuit the lights in his tank because they annoyed him. Otto figured out that if he climbed to the edge of his tank and squirted a jet of water at the overhead light, it would short-circuit and go out. The aquarium kept experiencing mysterious electrical problems. Maintenance couldn't figure out why the lights kept failing. They replaced bulbs, checked wiring, and investigated everything. Finally, staff stayed late and caught Otto in the act. He would climb out of the water, aim carefully, and squirt water directly at the light fixture, causing it to short out. When they tried to stop him by covering the light, Otto found new angles to squirt from. When they moved him to a different tank, he learned the light positions in the new tank within days. Otto had learned cause and effect, understood that the annoying light could be eliminated with water, and could aim accurately enough to hit a target outside his tank. The aquarium eventually had to redesign Otto's entire tank with waterproof lighting because they couldn't outsmart one octopus who had figured out their electrical system. The stupidity was engineers who designed an aquarium that could be disabled by its occupant, and then being unable to modify it faster than an octopus could learn new ways to break it. 3. A group of dolphins at a marine park learned to game the system for extra fish rewards. The park had a program where dolphins would collect litter that fell into their pool and bring it to trainers in exchange for fish. The dolphins were supposed to bring one piece of litter for one fish. One dolphin figured out that if she tore a piece of paper into multiple pieces, she could bring each piece separately and get multiple fish for one item. She then began hiding litter under a rock at the bottom of the pool. When she wanted fish, she would retrieve one small piece of hidden litter and trade it. She essentially created a litter bank, saving garbage to trade for food later when she was hungry. Other dolphins watched and learned this strategy. Soon, all the dolphins were hiding litter and rationing it out for maximum fish rewards. The trainers noticed the dolphins were bringing litter much more frequently than made sense, given how little trash actually fell in the pool. They discovered the hidden litter stash and realized the dolphins had learned to manipulate the reward system. When trainers tried to change the rules, dolphins adapted quickly. The dolphins had learned delayed gratification, storage, rationing, and resource management, essentially running a litter-based savings account. The stupidity was trainers creating a reward system without considering that dolphins might optimize it better than intended. 4. Crows in Sweden learned to steal credit cards from outdoor cafe tables and use them to buy food. The crows discovered that the small plastic cards humans left on tables were valuable. They started stealing credit cards and gift cards when people weren't looking. But they didn't just steal them, they figured out that taking them to certain outdoor vendors with card readers would result in food. Street food vendors with contactless payment terminals would sometimes process small transactions when crows accidentally triggered the readers with stolen cards. The crows learned which vendors had systems that could be triggered and which didn't. They would steal cards and fly directly to vendors where they'd figured out food appeared after card contact. Police initially thought it was an elaborate human theft ring, until surveillance showed crows were the thieves. The birds had learned to associate plastic cards with food acquisition and which machines responded to cards. When vendors secured their payment systems, crows adapted by finding new vulnerabilities. The stupidity was humans creating payment systems so automated that crows could accidentally or intentionally trigger purchases and leaving credit cards unattended where intelligent birds could access them. 5. A gorilla named Coco learned sign language and used it to lie and manipulate her handlers. Coco knew over 1,000 signs and understood 2,000 spoken words. But she didn't just use language to communicate, she used it to deceive. When Coco ripped a sink off the wall in her room, destroying it, her handler asked who did it. Coco signed "Cat did it" and blamed her pet kitten. When caught doing something she wasn't supposed to, Coco would sign apologies and promises to be good, then do the same thing again. She learned that certain signs would get her treats and use them even when they didn't apply. She would sign sad or hurt to gain sympathy when she simply wanted attention. She learned to combine signs in new ways to express concepts she hadn't been taught, showing creative language use. When handlers tried to discipline her, she would sign insults at them that she'd combined from different signs. Coco demonstrated that language learning includes learning to lie, manipulate, and express annoyance, essentially using human communication tools against humans. The stupidity was humans teaching a gorilla advanced communication without realizing she'd learned to use it for deception just like humans do. 6. Pigeons in a psychological study learned to play a simple version of poker and beat human participants. Scientists wanted to test decision-making and probability in birds. They taught pigeons to play a simplified card game with rewards for good hands. The pigeons not only learned the rules but became better at probability-based decisions than many human participants. The birds would consistently make statistically optimal choices, while humans would make emotional or illogical choices. Pigeons understood when to take risks and when to play it safe better than people. When researchers made the game more complex, pigeons adapted faster than humans. They weren't distracted by irrelevant information that confused human players. Pigeons played with perfect probability logic, while humans made mistakes based on superstition or emotion. The study was designed to show human cognitive superiority, but instead demonstrated that pigeons make better probability-based decisions than people. The stupidity was researchers designing a study to prove human intelligence was superior, and discovering that pigeons are better at probability mathematics than humans when emotional factors are involved. 7. A parrot named Alex learned to ask questions about objects he didn't understand, demonstrating curiosity and self-directed learning. Alex learned over 100 words, but more impressively, he learned to ask, "What's this?" when shown new objects. He wasn't just repeating, he was seeking information. When shown his reflection in a mirror, he asked, "What color?" Upon seeing himself, learning that he was gray. He would ask questions to gather information and then remember the answers. Alex demonstrated understanding of abstract concepts like same and different, bigger and smaller. He could count objects and understand zero as a quantity. But what shocked researchers most was when Alex asked what color he was, a question indicating self-awareness. When Alex was bored during tests, he would say, "Want to go back?" and refuse to participate, demonstrating autonomy. He would tell researchers no when he disagreed with their assessment of his performance. Alex wasn't just responding to training, he was learning independently and making choices. The stupidity was researchers who started studying animal communication, thinking they would control the experiment, but ended up with a bird who would argue with them and refuse to cooperate when he found the tests boring. 8. Rats in a laboratory learned to press levers in specific sequences to get larger rewards, but then taught their offspring the shortcut without the humans training the new generation. Scientists were studying learned behavior across generations. They trained rats to perform a complex sequence of lever presses to receive food: red lever, blue lever, green lever in that order for maximum reward. The trained rats learned this, but researchers discovered that the offspring of trained rats would perform the sequence correctly without being trained. The parents were teaching their children the shortcut. Baby rats watched their parents and learned the exact sequence. When researchers changed the sequence, Parent rats learned the new pattern and taught it to their offspring faster than researchers could train new rats directly. The rats had created an intergenerational knowledge transfer system, essentially rat culture. When scientists tried to introduce incorrect information by training some rats with suboptimal patterns, those rats' offspring would learn from watching other rats instead of their parents, choosing the better strategy. The rats had essentially developed peer learning networks. The stupidity was researchers who thought they were studying genetic versus learned behavior, but discovered rats had created an educational system that worked better than the researchers' training methods. 9. A chimp named Ayumu beat humans at memory tests consistently, demonstrating better working memory than any human tested. Scientists showed Ayumu numbers on a screen briefly, then covered them, and Ayumu had to touch them in numerical order. Ayumu could do this perfectly with 9 numbers shown for less than a second, faster than any human could process. Adult humans couldn't even get close to Ayumu's performance. Even memory experts and people who trained specifically for this test couldn't beat the chimp. Young chimps in general performed better than adult humans at this working memory task. Scientists theorized that chimps have superior working memory for spatial information compared to humans. But Ayumu wasn't just good, he was unbeatable. Researchers challenged him with faster displays and more numbers. He adapted and continued performing perfectly. The study designed to test primate memory turned into a demonstration that a chimp had cognitive abilities superior to humans in specific domains. The stupidity was scientists who assumed human memory was superior and designed a test that definitively proved a chimp's working memory is faster and more accurate than any humans. 10. Elephants in Africa learned that humans evacuate camps when they approach, and began raiding camps specifically for food. Elephants figured out that when they walked toward human camps, people would run away leaving food behind. They started approaching camps deliberately to steal food rather than accidentally wandering into them. Park rangers noticed elephants were targeting camps systematically rather than randomly. The elephants had learned the locations of all camps, the times when humans were typically present, and the optimal raid timing. Some elephants learned to distinguish between camps with armed guards and unguarded camps, preferentially targeting the safer ones. When rangers tried to protect camps with fences, elephants learned to break fences or find weaknesses. When loud noises were used as deterrents, elephants learned to ignore them if the noises weren't followed by real threats. The elephants essentially created raid strategies like military planning. Young elephants learned raiding techniques from older elephants, creating a teaching system. Rangers found themselves in an intelligence arms race with elephants who adapted to every defensive measure. The stupidity was humans who assumed elephants were just wandering into camps randomly, when actually elephants had learned to exploit human fear responses to get free food. 11. Raccoons in cities learned to open every type of raccoon-proof garbage can invented, often within days of installation. Cities kept designing more complex locking mechanisms to keep raccoons out of garbage. Raccoons learned to open them all. Simple latches, combination locks, weighted lids, twist mechanisms. Raccoons figured out everything. Videos showed raccoons studying the locks, trying different approaches, and successfully opening containers that humans needed instructions to operate. Some raccoons became specialists, teaching others how to open specific lock types. Cities spent millions designing new garbage cans, while raccoons defeated each new design quickly. Engineers would add additional security features. Raccoons would learn them. One city installed cans with a specific multi-step unlocking process that required remembering a sequence. Raccoons mastered it within a week. Researchers studying the phenomenon found that raccoons have excellent manual dexterity, problem-solving skills, and persistent motivation when food is involved. The stupidity was engineers designing increasingly complex trash cans, thinking they were smarter than raccoons, only to be consistently defeated by animals with brain-to-body mass ratios similar to primates. 12. A crow in Russia learned to snowboard down roofs for fun, demonstrating play behavior and tool use for entertainment. The crow found a jar lid, carried it to the top of a snow-covered roof, stood on it, and slid down. Then flew back up and did it again, repeatedly. The crow wasn't getting food or any survival benefit, it was playing. The behavior was filmed and showed clear evidence of animal recreation. Other crows watched and some attempted to copy it. The crow would select specific lids that worked better for sliding and reject ones that didn't work well. When the snow conditions changed, the crow adapted its technique. The crow had learned to use a tool for pure enjoyment, demonstrating abstract thought, planning, and entertainment-seeking behavior. Scientists noted this showed crows have leisure time and choose to spend it on fun activities. The stupidity was humans who believed only they had the intelligence for recreational activities, while the crow was literally snowboarding for fun. 13 orangutans at a zoo learned to pick locks and regularly escaped their enclosures to explore the zoo after hours. The orangutans watched zookeepers unlock doors and learned the mechanism. One orangutan named Fu Manchu figured out locks and would escape regularly. Staff couldn't understand how he was getting out until they caught him with a piece of wire he'd fashioned into a lockpick. Fu Manchu had been hiding the wire in his mouth between escapes. He would wait for staff to leave, retrieve his tool, pick the lock, and roam the zoo. Other orangutans learned from watching him. The escapes became a regular problem. When staff changed locks, orangutans learned the new locks. When they installed more complex locking systems, orangutans figured those out too. Finally, staff had to search orangutans' mouths before leaving to confiscate lock-picking tools they'd created. The orangutans demonstrated tool creation, tool use, observational learning, planning, and concealment of evidence. The stupidity was zookeepers who took years to realize orangutans had created tools and were hiding them, and continued to assume new locks would work when orangutans kept defeating every lock design. 14. Crows in Japan learned to use cars to crack nuts by placing them in crosswalks and waiting for cars to run them over. Crows discovered that hard nuts could be broken by placing them in the street and letting cars drive over them. But they went further. They learned to place nuts in crosswalks specifically. Crows would wait for red lights, place nuts in the crosswalk, move to safety, and wait for the light to turn green. Cars would drive over the nuts. When the light turned red again, crows would fly down and collect the cracked nuts safely. The crows had learned traffic patterns, traffic light timing, and how to use crosswalks for safety. They adapted human traffic systems for their own purposes. When researchers studied this behavior, they found that young crows learned the technique from older crows, and that crows selected the busiest intersections for more reliable cracking. Some crows even learned which types of vehicles were more effective at cracking nuts based on tire type. The stupidity was humans who designed traffic systems without realizing crows would exploit crosswalk timing and traffic patterns to crack nuts more effectively than natural methods. 15. Dolphins learned to capture fish by creating mud circles that trap fish and force them to jump out of the water into the dolphins' mouths. Dolphins in Florida developed this technique called mud ring feeding. They swim in circles, creating a ring of mud on the ocean floor. The mud clouds float up, creating a cylindrical wall. Fish trapped inside the mud ring panic and jump out of the water to escape, directly into waiting dolphins' mouths. This technique demonstrates understanding of physics, teamwork, and exploitation of fish behavior. Dolphins teach this technique to their offspring and other dolphins. They've developed variations for different water depths and fish types. Human fishermen studied the technique and tried to copy it but found it extremely difficult to execute effectively. The dolphins essentially created a natural fishing technology that required understanding of sediment, water currents, and fish psychology. Marine biologists study this technique as an example of animal intelligence and cultural transmission. The stupidity was humans who thought fishing techniques were uniquely human inventions, while dolphins were using more sophisticated methods that exploit animal behavior in ways human fishing doesn't. 16. A border collie named Chaser learned over 1,000 words and could retrieve specific toys by name, even inferring the names of new toys through process of elimination. Scientists taught Chaser the names of toys systematically. She learned to distinguish between 1,022 different objects. But more impressively, when given a new toy with an unknown name among toys she knew, she could infer which object the new name referred to. She understood process of elimination. If all the toys she could see were ones she knew except one, the unknown toy must be the one with the new name. Chaser could also learn categories. Ball referred to any ball, even if she'd never seen that specific ball before. She understood syntax and could follow compound commands involving multiple toys and multiple actions. When researchers tested if she'd memorized locations rather than names, she performed perfectly even when toys were moved. Chaser demonstrated understanding of nouns, verbs, and grammar. The stupidity was researchers who studied vocabulary in dogs thinking they'd hit an upper limit, but kept increasing the number because Chaser never showed signs of reaching maximum capacity. She might have learned more if they'd kept teaching her. 17. Baboons in South Africa learned to raid cars stopped at traffic lights, specifically targeting ones they'd learned contained food. The baboons studied human behavior and learned which types of vehicles typically contained food. Tourist vehicles, family cars with children, delivery vans. They would wait at traffic lights, and when certain vehicles stopped, they'd open doors and raid them. The baboons learned how to open car doors of various models. They learned not to waste time on commercial vehicles without food. They learned that vehicles with luggage racks often contained food. They could assess a vehicle and decide if it was worth raiding in seconds. When authorities tried to deter them with loud noises, baboons learned which noises preceded real danger and which were bluffs. Some baboons became specialists in certain car models, knowing exactly how to open specific door types. Rangers tried changing traffic light timing, but baboons adapted. They tried placing deterrents, but baboons learned to avoid those and target lights without them. The baboons essentially profiled vehicles and optimized their raiding strategy. The stupidity was humans who couldn't predict baboon raids, even when baboons had clear patterns, and who couldn't design car security systems that baboons couldn't defeat. 18. Rats in New York learned the subway system and ride trains to travel between food sources. Rats figured out that subway trains go to consistent destinations. They learned which trains go where and use them to travel. Rats wait on platforms and board trains going to areas with good food. They exit at their destination. Some rats take multiple trains with transfers. Transit workers noticed rats using the system deliberately rather than accidentally wandering onto trains. Researchers found that rats had learned the subway map better than many tourists. Rats knew which times had less human traffic and preferred to travel then. Some rats had regular commutes between nest locations and feeding areas. When train schedules changed, rats adapted within days. The rats essentially treated the subway as public transportation, designed for their use. The stupidity was humans who built a transportation system so logical and consistent that rats learned to use it better than some human users, and who couldn't design barriers that prevented rat passengers. 19. An octopus named Inky escaped from the National Aquarium of New Zealand by squeezing through a small gap, crawling across the floor, and entering a drain pipe that led to the ocean. Inky's tank had a small gap at the top that maintenance left slightly open. Inky waited until night when staff left, squeezed his body through a gap barely wider than a coin, dropped to the floor, crawled across 8 feet of floor, found a drain pipe, entered it, and followed it 160 feet to the ocean. Staff arrived to find an empty tank and eventually figured out his escape route. Inky had demonstrated planning, patience, environmental awareness, and navigation skills. He knew the drain led to the ocean despite never having seen where it went. Octopuses are known escape artists, but Inky's escape was particularly elaborate. He had to know when staff would be gone, how to exit his tank, navigate an unfamiliar environment, and find the specific drain that led to freedom. The stupidity was aquarium staff who left a gap in the tank of one of the world's most intelligent invertebrates and didn't predict he'd learn the facility's drainage system. 20. Capuchin monkeys learned to use money in an experiment and immediately developed prostitution, theft, and gambling. Scientists taught monkeys to use metal discs as currency to buy food. The monkeys learned that discs could be exchanged for treats. But then monkeys invented unintended economic behaviors. One monkey gave discs to another monkey in exchange for sex, prostitution. Monkeys began stealing discs from others. Some monkeys hoarded discs. Monkeys began gambling, trading discs for uncertain outcomes. When experimenters tried to intervene, monkeys hid their transactions. The monkeys had independently developed economic behaviors that humans consider vices. They understood exchange, value, and even exploitation within days of learning currency. Researchers realized monkeys grasped economic principles immediately and applied them in ways the experimenters hadn't taught. The study had to be modified because monkeys were inventing economic crimes faster than researchers could document them. The stupidity was economists who thought human economic behavior was learned culture, when actually monkeys invented prostitution, gambling, and theft within days of learning money existed. 21. A seagull in Scotland learned to steal potato chips by knocking them out of tourists' hands and became so successful that other seagulls copied the technique. The seagull developed a specific attack pattern: swoop from behind, hit the food, and grab it before it hits the ground. Other seagulls watched and learned. Soon, groups of seagulls were coordinating attacks where one would distract tourists while another stole food. The seagulls learned which foods were worth stealing based on caloric value. They targeted ice cream, chips, and sandwiches, but ignored vegetables. They learned to identify which tourists were easy targets: children, distracted people, and tourists taking photos. When the city tried deterrence programs, seagulls adapted. They learned that fake predator birds weren't real threats. They learned that humans who shooed them away weren't actually dangerous. Some seagulls specialized in specific steal techniques for different foods. The seagulls essentially studied human behavior and optimized their theft strategies based on success rates. The stupidity was humans who couldn't protect their food from birds who'd created sophisticated theft operations, targeting tourist psychology. 22. A group of monkeys in India learned that humans would trade food for stolen items, so they began deliberately stealing from tourists to ransom items back. Monkeys discovered that if they stole something from a human, sunglasses, bags, cameras, humans would offer food to get items back. The monkeys started targeting high-value items they'd learned humans valued more. They learned which items got the best ransom offers. Glasses got more food than hats. Cameras got the most food. Monkeys would steal items they personally had no use for, specifically to ransom them. Young monkeys learned the ransom trade from older monkeys. Some monkeys became specialists in pickpocketing, while others specialized in negotiation. When tourists stopped offering ransom, monkeys destroyed items in front of owners until humans learned to pay. The monkeys had essentially created an extortion economy based on human attachment to objects. Tour guides warned tourists about the ransom monkeys, but monkeys adapted by targeting new arrivals before they'd been warned. The stupidity was humans who created a monkey extortion economy by paying ransoms, and who couldn't stop monkeys from pickpocketing despite knowing the monkeys' strategy. 23. Crows in Australia learned to steal anti-bird spikes from buildings and use them to build more secure nests. Humans installed spikes to prevent birds from landing on buildings. Crows pulled the spikes off and wove them into their nests. The spikes designed to deter birds were being used as nest defense spikes that other birds couldn't attack. Crows had turned an anti-bird device into a pro-bird defense system. Building owners kept installing spikes. Crows kept stealing them. Some crows became experts at removing spikes efficiently. Nests with stolen spikes were more successful at protecting eggs and chicks. Young crows learned to identify and steal the best spikes. When buildings switched to different spike designs, crows adapted and figured out how to remove those too. The crows essentially treated buildings as hardware stores for nest building supplies. The stupidity was humans who spent thousands installing bird deterrent spikes that crows converted into superior nesting material, inadvertently providing birds with free building supplies. 24. A beluga whale named Valdemir appeared to be trained by Russia as a spy and approached Norwegian boats seeking mission completion. The whale appeared wearing a harness labeled Equipment St. Petersburg and approached boats unusually. Valdemir had been trained to retrieve objects and follow boats, spy whale behavior, but Valdemir seemed confused about what he was supposed to do and kept approaching humans as if seeking instructions for a mission that didn't exist anymore. The whale had been taught to find and retrieve objects, but appeared to have been released or escaped before mission completion. Valdemir was friendly with humans and performed trained behaviors, showing he expected rewards. The whale essentially kept trying to work for humans who weren't his trainers. Marine experts determined Valdemir had been trained for military purposes, but whoever trained him wasn't present. The whale outsmarted his trainers by either escaping or being accidentally released, then confused Norwegian officials who couldn't figure out what a friendly, trained spy whale wanted. The stupidity was a military training program that resulted in a whale seeking new employers because his original trainers lost track of him. 25. Pigs learned to play video games using joysticks with their snouts and performed better than some dogs at the same tasks. Scientists wanted to test pig intelligence by teaching them simple video games. Pigs learned to use joysticks to move cursors and hit targets on screens for food rewards. Pigs mastered the games quickly and demonstrated understanding of cause and effect. Joystick movements caused cursor movements. They learned which screen movements corresponded to which physical joystick movements despite the abstract relationship. When researchers compared pigs to dogs on the same tasks, pigs learned faster and performed more consistently. Dogs would get distracted or bored. Pigs maintained focus on earning rewards. Pigs demonstrated they understood the concept of video game mechanics, that their physical actions affected virtual space. Some pigs learned to predict target patterns and position cursors preemptively. The stupidity was scientists who tested pigs thinking they'd demonstrate animal intelligence, and found that pigs understood video games better than many human toddlers, and beat dogs at the same tasks. 26. Ravens learned to solve multi-step puzzles requiring tools to be used in sequence, outperforming young children at the same tasks. Researchers designed puzzles where ravens had to use tools in a specific sequence to get food. Use stick A to retrieve stick B. Use stick B to trigger mechanism C. Mechanism C releases food. Ravens solved these puzzles faster than human children under 5 years old. Ravens demonstrated planning. They would collect all necessary tools before starting the puzzle, showing they understood the full sequence before beginning. Ravens could solve puzzles they'd never seen before by applying learned principles to new situations. When researchers reversed puzzle sequences or changed requirements, ravens adapted within a few attempts. Some ravens developed more efficient solutions than researchers had anticipated. The ravens demonstrated understanding of causation, tool properties, and sequence planning. The stupidity was cognitive scientists who designed tests to study tool use and sequential thinking, and found that ravens were better at it than young humans, suggesting bird intelligence includes abstract reasoning capabilities previously thought to be uniquely human. 27. Squirrels learned to defeat every bird feeder design by studying the mechanisms and exploiting weaknesses. Engineers kept designing squirrel-proof bird feeders. Squirrels defeated them all. Spinning feeders, weighted feeders, maze feeders, baffles. Nothing worked. Videos showed squirrels studying feeders, testing different approaches, and eventually succeeding. Squirrels demonstrated understanding of physics, weight distribution, momentum, leverage. They learned which parts of feeders were strong and which were weak. Squirrels shared techniques. Feeders that one squirrel learned to beat, others in the area learned quickly. Some squirrels became specialists, able to defeat feeders that puzzled other squirrels. When one feeder design was finally squirrel-resistant, squirrels learned to steal seed from the ground below it. Engineers spent decades in an arms race with squirrels who adapted to every countermeasure. The stupidity was engineers treating squirrel-proofing as a technical challenge and being consistently defeated by rodents who treated it as a food puzzle. 28. Orcas learned to hunt great white sharks specifically for their livers, demonstrating surgical precision and knowledge of shark anatomy. Orcas developed a technique for killing great white sharks and extracting only the liver, the most nutritious organ. Orcas would flip sharks upside down, inducing tonic immobility, paralysis, then make precise bites to remove the liver, leaving the rest. The orcas' knowledge of shark anatomy was so precise that their liver extraction was described as surgical. They taught this technique to offspring, creating a cultural hunting practice. Great white sharks began fleeing areas when orcas appeared, showing they learned to fear orcas. Orcas had essentially established themselves as apex predators over creatures previously considered apex predators. The hunting technique demonstrated anatomical knowledge, precision, and selective eating that showed planning and preference. Marine biologists studied orca liver extraction and were amazed at the anatomical precision. The stupidity was researchers who studied predator relationships, thinking they understood the hierarchy, only to discover orcas had developed surgical hunting techniques that target specific organs of apex predators like precision butchers. 29. Sheep learned to roll across cattle grids designed to keep them confined by lying on their sides and rolling over the bars. Farmers installed cattle grids, metal bar grids that animals won't cross because their hooves fall through the gaps. Sheep were supposed to be contained. One sheep discovered that by lying on its side and rolling, it could cross the grid without its hooves falling through. Other sheep watched and learned the technique. Soon, entire flocks were escaping by rolling across grids. Farmers installed higher grids. Sheep rolled over those too. Some sheep became expert rollers, teaching others. Young lambs learned rolling from adults. Farmers tried various modifications, but sheep adapted to each change. The sheep essentially learned that the physical properties that made grids effective barriers to walking were irrelevant when rolling. The stupidity was farmers who installed barriers based on animal psychology. Animals won't step on unstable surfaces, without considering that sheep might literally change their approach and roll. 30. A gorilla named Coco adopted a pet kitten and mourned its death, demonstrating emotional depth that surprised researchers. Coco requested a cat for her birthday using sign language. She was given a kitten she named All Ball. Coco treated the kitten gently, petting it carefully and carrying it around. When the kitten died in an accident, Coco signed bad, sad, bad, and frown, cry, frown, sad. She showed clear signs of grief. Coco continued asking about the kitten months later. She later adopted more cats, showing each one affection. Coco's grief responses were similar to human mourning: denial, sadness, gradual acceptance. She demonstrated that gorillas have deep emotional bonds with other species and process loss similarly to humans. Researchers who studied Coco noted her emotional reactions were as complex as human grief. The stupidity was humans who believed emotional depth and cross-species bonding were unique human traits, while Coco was demonstrating grief, love, and ongoing memory of a pet cat. 31. Cats in Turkey learned to use automatic doors by triggering motion sensors and timing their entry. Cats figured out that standing in front of automatic doors triggered them to open. They learned the sensor range and timing. Cats would position themselves, wait for the door to open, and enter buildings. Groups of cats worked together. One would trigger the door while others entered. Cats memorized which doors were automatic and visited them regularly. Security footage showed cats entering and leaving buildings systematically using automatic doors. When motion sensors were adjusted, cats adapted to new ranges within days. Some cats learned to trigger doors by waving tails or paws through the sensor zone. The cats essentially treated buildings with automatic doors as having cat entrances. Building security couldn't keep cats out without disabling automatic doors entirely. The stupidity was architects who designed motion-sensing doors for human convenience without realizing cats would learn to exploit the sensors for building access. 32. Chimpanzees in Africa learned to make and use spears for hunting, demonstrating tool creation and hunting planning. Researchers observed chimps finding straight branches, removing side branches, sharpening points with their teeth, and using the spears to jab into tree hollows where small primates hid. The chimps had essentially created simple weapons. They selected appropriate wood, modified it for the purpose, and used it systematically. Female chimps were more likely to make and use spears than males. Young chimps learned spear making from adults. The chimps demonstrated understanding of tool properties: length, strength, sharpness. When initial spears broke or dulled, chimps would sharpen them or create new ones. The spear creation showed planning. Chimps made spears before hunting, not during, showing they anticipated need. This was the first observation of non-human animals creating weapons for hunting. The stupidity was anthropologists who believed tool creation and weapon use for hunting were defining human characteristics, while chimps were independently creating and using spears. 33. Rats learned to drive tiny cars in a laboratory and would drive to locations with treats, demonstrating spatial learning and vehicle operation. Scientists built small cars for rats operated by levers. Rats learned that moving levers made the car move. They learned to navigate the cars to treat locations. Rats demonstrated understanding that their actions controlled vehicle movement. They learned steering, forward movement, and stopping. Rats showed excitement about driving. They would approach the cars eagerly and seemed to enjoy the activity. When treats were moved to different locations, rats learned new routes quickly. Rats learned to navigate obstacles while driving. Brain scans showed rats experienced reward activation while driving, similar to humans enjoying activities. Rats essentially learned to operate vehicles for the purpose of obtaining food. and seemed to enjoy driving as an activity. The stupidity was researchers who designed an experiment to study learning and ended up with rats who could drive cars better than some human learners and appeared to find driving enjoyable. 34. Bees learned to solve puzzles for sugar rewards and taught other bees the solutions through observation. Scientists gave bees puzzles requiring them to pull strings to access sugar water. Bees figured out the puzzles through trial and error. But then untrained bees who watched trained bees solve puzzles learned the solutions without trial and error. Pure observation learning. Bees demonstrated social learning, memory, and problem solving. When puzzles were made more complex, trained bees eventually succeeded and observers learned from them. Bees showed they could learn abstract concepts, that pulling strings releases rewards, and apply them to new situations. Bees that learned from observation performed as well as bees that learned through trial and error. The bees essentially created a teaching and learning system. The stupidity was researchers who believed insect behavior was purely instinctual and found that bees have observation learning, teaching behaviors, and problem-solving abilities similar to vertebrates with much larger brains. 35. Goats learned to open complex, locked boxes that required multiple steps, solving them faster than expected and teaching each other. Researchers gave goats boxes requiring 4 steps to open in sequence: lift lever, turn wheel, push button, pull door. Goats figured it out within minutes. When tested months later, goats remember the solution immediately. Young goats who watched learned the solution without training. Goats demonstrated understanding of cause and effect across multiple steps. When boxes were modified with different locks, goats adapted quickly. Some goats learned faster than others and became teachers that other goats observed. Goats showed frustration, tolerance, and persistence when attempting solutions. The speed of learning shocked researchers expecting goats to struggle with multi-step problems. The stupidity was scientists who designed multi-step puzzles expecting to challenge goats over long periods. But goats solved them in minutes and remembered solutions for months while teaching each other. 36. A group of orcas learned to steal fish from fishing boats by watching boats, waiting for catch, and taking fish directly from lines or nets. Orcas figured out that boats meant easy fish. They learned to identify fishing boats versus other boats. They learned that certain boat activities meant fish were being caught. Orcas would wait for fishermen to hook fish, then grab fish off the line before fishermen could reel them in. Some orcas learned to target specific types of fishing gear. Fishermen tried changing techniques, but orcas adapted. The orcas learned to identify individual boats and fishermen, targeting those with best fish or worst defenses. Young orcas learned fishing boat rating from adults. Some orcas developed specializations. Some were better at stealing from nets, others from lines. Orcas essentially treated fishing boats as food delivery services. Fishermen couldn't prevent the theft despite trying multiple deterrents. The stupidity was commercial fishermen losing economic battles to orcas who learned fishing patterns faster than fishermen could develop countermeasures. 37. Crows in Japan learned to drop walnuts from specific heights onto specific surfaces for optimal cracking efficiency. Crows didn't just drop nuts randomly, they calculated drop heights and chose surfaces. Researchers found crows preferred dropping nuts from about 15 feet onto pavement rather than soil, and adjusted drop height based on nut size and shell thickness. Crows demonstrated understanding of physics, height, surface hardness, and impact force. They learned through trial which combinations worked best. Crows who learned optimal techniques had higher success rates and spent less energy. Young crows learned these refinements from adults. When researchers changed variables by introducing different surfaces, crows tested them and adjusted strategies. The crows essentially conducted physics experiments to optimize their nut cracking efficiency. The stupidity was physicists who studied crow behavior and found that crows were empirically optimizing impact force equations through trial and error more efficiently than humans could have explained to them mathematically. 38. A group of monkeys in Thailand learned that humans would feed them if the monkeys acted cute, so they deliberately performed behaviors they'd learned humans rewarded. Monkeys observed tourist behavior and learned which monkey actions triggered human feeding. Making eye contact, looking sad, showing babies, and approaching slowly all increased feeding probability. Monkeys began deliberately performing these behaviors when tourists appeared. Adult monkeys taught young monkeys which behaviors worked best. Some monkeys became experts at tourist manipulation, earning significantly more food than others. When tourist feeding was discouraged, monkeys adapted by approaching tourists in locations where feeding was still tolerated. Monkeys demonstrated understanding that specific behaviors produced predictable human responses. They essentially learned to act in ways that manipulated human emotions for food rewards. The stupidity was tourists who thought they were observing natural monkey behavior when actually monkeys were performing calculated acts designed to trigger human feeding responses. 39. Dogs learned to fake injuries and illness for attention and sympathy, demonstrating understanding of human emotional responses. Multiple dog owners reported dogs faking limps, coughs, or distress to receive attention. When examined by vets, dogs showed no actual injury. Dogs would recover immediately when attention was received or when owners stopped responding. Dogs learned that injury behaviors produced human sympathy and attention. Some dogs targeted specific family members who were most responsive to distress. Dogs demonstrated understanding that their physical state affected human emotional responses. When owners caught on and stopped responding, dogs would escalate or switch to different fake ailments. Veterinarians documented cases of dogs faking medical conditions convincingly enough to warrant examinations. The stupidity was humans who believed dogs were incapable of deliberate deception, while dogs were successfully faking illnesses to manipulate human attention. 40. Ravens learned to trick other animals into finding food, then steal it, demonstrating intentional deception and forward planning. Ravens would watch where other animals buried food. They'd return later to steal cached food. But more cleverly, ravens learned to fake caching food in visible locations, making deceptive movements, then actually hide food elsewhere. Other ravens or animals watching would dig in the fake locations, while the deceiving raven retrieved food from the real location. Ravens demonstrated theory of mind, understanding what other ravens know and using that knowledge for deception. They planned a deception before executing it. Young ravens learned deception techniques from adults. Ravens even deceived their own mates when valuable food was involved. The stupidity was cognitive scientists who believed abstract thought and intentional deception were uniquely human cognitive skills, while ravens were running con games on other ravens and species. 41. Elephants learned to sabotage electric fences by throwing logs or rocks onto them to short circuits. Farmers installed electric fences to protect crops from elephants. Elephants learned to pick up logs with their trunks and drop them onto the fences, shorting the electrical system. Once the fence was disabled, elephants entered and raided crops. Elephants demonstrated understanding of cause and effect. Object-touching fence caused power failure. They learned to use tools, logs, rocks to disable barriers. When farmers tried to protect fence bases, elephants found ways to throw objects from angles that bypassed protections. Young elephants learned fence sabotage from adults. Some elephant groups became expert fence saboteurs. Farmers installed backup systems, but elephants learned to disable those too. The stupidity was agricultural engineers who designed fence systems thinking they were dealing with animals who would simply avoid electrical barriers, when actually elephants were developing tools and techniques specifically to break fencing. 42. Otters in Alaska learned to use rocks to smash open clams and developed individual preferences for specific rocks they'd carry with them. Sea otters use rocks to break open shellfish, well documented, but researchers found otters had favorite rocks they kept and transported. Individual otters could be identified by their rock choice, size, shape, weight. Otters demonstrated tool selection based on personal preference and efficiency. They kept valuable tools rather than using disposable tools. Young otters learned tool use from mothers and developed their own preferences. When otters lost their rocks, they showed distress and searched extensively. Some otters had multiple tools for different shellfish types. The otters had essentially developed personal toolkits with preferred implements. The stupidity was researchers who documented otter tool use but took years to realize otters weren't using random rocks. They were maintaining personal tool collections and could be individually identified by their tool preferences. 43. A group of elephants learned that humans would provide water during droughts if elephants approached, so they began deliberately visiting human settlements during dry seasons. Elephants figured out that approaching human settlements, when thirsty, usually resulted in humans providing water. Elephants began showing up at specific locations during specific times when drought was severe. They demonstrated understanding that humans could provide resources and that approaching, rather than raiding or destroying, was more effective. Elephants learned which settlements were water sources and which weren't. Young elephants learned to follow adults to human water sources during drought. When humans tried to discourage dependence, elephants persisted knowing humans wouldn't let them die of thirst. The elephants had essentially learned to seek human assistance during emergencies, understanding that humans would help if approached properly. The stupidity was conservation efforts trying to keep elephants wild and independent, while elephants were learning that cooperating with humans during crisis was a successful survival strategy. 44. Crows learned to bring gifts to humans who fed them. Shiny objects, bottle caps, pieces of metal, demonstrating reciprocity and relationship building. Multiple people who fed crows regularly reported finding small objects left where they typically fed crows. Objects included buttons, pieces of glass, small metal objects, and shiny items. Crows appeared to be leaving gifts as reciprocation for food. Some crows developed relationships with specific humans, learning their schedules and faces. Crows would bring gifts specifically to humans who fed them, not to other humans. Gift quality and frequency correlated with feeding reliability. Researchers studying the phenomenon found crows demonstrated understanding of reciprocity and relationship maintenance. The crows had essentially learned social contract behavior, gifts for services. The stupidity was humans who assumed reciprocity and gift-giving were uniquely human social behaviors, while crows were independently developing gift-giving relationships with humans who fed them. 45. A group of dolphins in a marine park learned to manipulate their trainers by hiding fish they'd been given as rewards and presenting them later to get double rewards for single performances. Dolphins were rewarded with fish for performing tricks. Trainers noticed they were going through fish faster than expected. Investigation revealed dolphins had learned to tear off small pieces of fish, eat some, hide the rest under rocks at the bottom of the pool, and retrieve hidden pieces to present as if they'd found litter, which also earned fish rewards through the litter collection program. The dolphins had essentially created a fish banking system where they could save fish to trade for more fish later. They understood delayed gratification and resource management. Some dolphins became expert fish hoarders, maintaining hidden caches. When trainers caught on and checked for hidden fish, dolphins adapted by finding better hiding spots or eating their caches before searches. The dolphins demonstrated forward planning, deception, and resource manipulation. They'd figured out that the litter collection system and the performance reward system could be gamed by managing fish as both reward and tradable resource. They essentially ran a circular economy where fish rewards could be recycled into more fish rewards. The stupidity was trainers who created two separate reward systems. Without realizing, dolphins would figure out how to exploit both simultaneously, creating an economic arbitrage system where dolphins could manufacture rewards by hiding and relocating fish they'd already been given. And who took months to realize dolphins had invented a fraud scheme more sophisticated than most human financial crimes. Subscribe if you want to remember that being outsmarted by animals is humbling and happens more than we admit. That intelligence takes many forms and isn't measured purely by human standards, and that the next time you think you've designed something animals can't defeat, remember that somewhere a crow, raccoon, or octopus is probably already figuring out how to beat your system, and they're not even trying as hard as you did to design it.